Good evening, all. Myself, Dr. Ahsan from Jivas Bangalore. Today, we'll be discussing on compartment syndrome and its management. By definition, compartment syndrome is an increased pressure within an enclosed osteophyseal space that reduces the capillary perfusion below levels necessary for tissue viability. The underlying mechanism is increased volume within the space, decreased space for content, or combination of both. There are two types of compartment syndrome. In general, when we refer to compartment syndrome, it is the acute compartment syndrome, which is a medical emergency caused by severe injury, can lead to permanent muscle damage. A chronic compartment syndrome is the other. It's a non as exertional compartment syndrome, not a medical emergency, most often caused by athletic exertion. From now onwards, we will be talking on acute compartment syndrome. The pathogenesis is by an arterial damage leading to ischemia that will in turn produce edema of the muscles, or the edema can be produced by a direct injury, and this increases the compartment pressure and it further reduces the blood flow, and this vicious cycle continues. A fasciotomy can break this cycle, and we can come out of the rising compartment pressure. The local hemodynamics of compartment syndrome are, regardless of the etiology or anatomic location, is an increase in the compartmental pressure within the unyielding facial envelope that impairs tissue perfusion. Tissue perfusion is given by the equation which is directly proportional to the radius and the delta P. Delta P is the difference between arterial and venous pressure. The venous pressure goes up when the compartment pressure goes up. That means when the compartmental pressure increases, the delta P decreases. When the whole shape of the compartment remains unyielding this thing, so the radius remains constant. So in effect, the perfusion decreases. The compartment pressures. Several theories exploring the role of intracompartmental pressure in the development of compartment syndrome have been proposed. We'll look into these theories in detail. Critical crossing pressure. It was described by Maston, above which the capillaries will collapse. From transmural pressure, blood flow is arrested. Hartsock found that the pressure gradient of ICP and mean arterial pressure of 25.5 arrest the capillary blood flow. But a vital microscopic study of rat cremasteric muscle saw no significant collapse of arterioles or capillaries or venules. Another entity is absolute intracompartmental pressure threshold. Huygens found that an absolute intracompartmental pressure of 30 mm of mercury for 8 hours universally produce a muscle necrosis in normotensive dogs, whereas the pressure less than 30 mm of mercury produce no necrosis. So tissues differ in their susceptibility to the intracompartmental pressure. So early signs of injury is seen in nerve fibers, the endoneural injury. Another commonly used entity is the dynamic intracompartmental pressure threshold. Absolute pressure ignores the role of arterial blood pressure in affecting the compartmental blood flow. Heppenstall found that healthy muscle in dog developed evidence of tissue ischemia on magnetic resonance spectroscopy when the difference between mean arterial pressure and the compartment pressure dropped below 30. And in injured muscle, these injuries are seen even with a drop differential of 40. So the dynamic pressure threshold of 40 prevented unnecessary fasciotomies in a number of patients with absolute ICP exceeding more than 30 mm of mercury. And a dramatic increase in the injury of necrosis between when the difference between, when you consider diastolic pressure, a less than 10 mm of mercury differential produce same kind of injuries. So these studies offer compelling evidence that a dynamic ICP threshold relative to mean arterial pressure or diastolic pressure is more appropriate for selecting patients for fasciotomy. So we coming to the clinical etiologies. There are vascular causes and non-vascular causes for compartment syndrome. Elevated ICP by increasing compartment volume or produce external compression on the compartment. The most common vascular etiologies are ischemic reperfusion injuries, arterial and venous traumatic injuries, crush injuries, phlegmasia cerulea dolens, and hemorrhage within a compartment. Ischemia reperfusion plays a central role in the pathogenesis of compartment syndrome due to acute ischemia and crush injuries. Increase compartment volume by causing muscle injury. There will be tissue reperfusion, oxygen radical generation. This will cause increased microvascular permeability with efflux of plasma protein and leading to edema and of the compartment and rise in the intracompartmental pressure. Palambros identified several risk factors for compartment syndrome after acute arterial ischemia. These include prolonged ischemia time, more than 6 hours, young age, insufficient arterial collaterals, acute time for arterial occlusion, and hypotension, poor back bleeding from the distal arterial tree at embolectomy. Coming to the causes in details, the trauma causes it could be arterial or venous trauma. Occlusive arterial injuries result in distal ischemia that initiate ischemia reperfusion phenomenon. Venous injuries may compromise venous outflow. Fasciotomy writes varying type of the vascular injury ranging from in isolated arterial injury it may comes up to 29%, and in isolated venous it come up to 15%. In combined injuries it goes up to 31%. Injuries of the popliteal arteries also produce a very high incidence of compartment syndrome, coming up to 61% compared to the above knee occlusions of 19%. Venous outflow obstruction. DVT often increase the ICP, but in general, it doesn't produce any compartment syndrome. But extensive DVT with multi-level DVT with occlusion of the venous collaterals is the venous outflow obstruction sufficient to produce compartment syndrome. Arterial venous pressure gradient. The delta P is altered and capillary blood flow is impaired. Muscle cell injury, which will cause the muscle cell injury and later increasing the edema. Eventually, the postcapillary venous thrombus and venous gangrene develops. Hemorrhage. A rapid increase in the compartment pressure is produced by hemorrhage into the compartment. For example, a thigh compartment syndrome happens after a rupture of popliteal artery aneurysm or a postoperative hemorrhage after joint replacement surgery in an anticoagulated patient. Non-vascular etiologies. Fracture, crush injuries, iatrogenic and secondary compartment syndrome. Coming to fractures, it causes compartment syndrome of incidence up to 1 to 29%. Tibial or the forearm fractures is the most common orthopedic causes. Tibial mostly produce anterior compartment syndrome, and forearm it affects mostly the flexor compartment. This is caused by the injury to the surrounding muscles and bleeding into the compartment, increasing the compartmental pressure. More commonly seen in comminuted fractures because of the great energy absorbed during injury. Next is crush injuries. Crushing by the equipment or an industrial site or a large building structure during an earthquake and blunt trauma due to assault. Direct muscle injury and ischemia reperfusion due to direct compartment pressure with the underlying muscle ischemia, subsequent reperfusion upon removal of the external compressive force. And in general, this patient will receive a lot of crystalloid for resuscitation that also contribute to the edema of the compartment and compartmental pressure rise. Iatrogenic causes include extravasation of large volume of fluid within the muscle compartment, extravasation of caustic medication such as contrast agent, which is used during angiograms, can produce rising compartment pressure. Inadvertent arterial injection can produce as hemorrhage, which we described in the previous slides, related to arterial or venous puncture, especially in an anticoagulated patient or a patient with coagulopathy. Compression injuries associated with prolonged intraoperative immobilization or plaster cast immobilization can produce compartmental pressure rise. A secondary compartment syndrome is an entity. It's seen in patients with trauma, but there is no direct extremity trauma. This is a proposed reason is trauma-induced systemic inflammatory response syndrome and leads to diffuse microvascular permeability. Along with massive fluid resuscitation leads to intracompartmental edema and compartment syndrome. The clinical presentation. High index of suspicion should be maintained in patient who are there is a chance of compartment syndrome. Pain that is disproportionate to the injury, paresthesia in the distal extremity, early symptom of ischemia of the nerve traversing the muscle compartment in question. The pain is typically not relieved by immobilization or reduction of the fractures or respond poorly to analgesic medication. A tense swollen compartment with pain elicited by passive movements of the muscle in that compartment On neurological examination, for example, in an anterior compartment, the deep peroneal nerve traversing through the compartment will be affected. Patient on examination will be able to make out a numbness in the first dorsal well space and inability to extend the great toe. And 2-point discrimination is a very high sensitivity of sensory examination. But in general, the sensitivity of clinical findings are very low. 13 to 19% is the sensitivity. But clinical examination has a very high negative predictive value of 97 to 98%. So to conclude, clinical features of compartment syndrome are more useful in their absence in excluding the diagnosis. Measurement of compartment pressures. In general, it is not required to ascertain the diagnosis of compartment syndrome. Measuring ICP is superfluous and risk delaying the definitive therapy. But it has a role in case situations like equivocal cases, unconscious patients, and pediatric patients who can't come up with the symptoms. So the technique is simple manometry or a Vicks catheter, slit catheters, side port needles, fiber optic transducers. The two components of either of the system is a needle to access the compartment, a pressure measurement system. Most commonly used system is arterial line manometer and handheld Stryker system. This is the traditional simple setup to measure a compartment pressure. We need a needle to access the compartment and a saline column connected through a three-way to a mercury manometer. We have to poke into the compartment in question, and this will give when the three-way is on in all direction, we can get a reading in the mercury manometer. These are the other market available products: Stryker handheld system, Stryker slit catheter. The most symptomatic or turgid compartment should be interrogated first. ICP and mean arterial pressure, diastolic pressure should be recorded for the medical record. There are some unusual presentation of compartment. In general, it is seen in leg, but it can affect upper extremity, hand, thigh, foot, buttock, and other than this, we have, especially in general surgery, we are more familiar with abdominal compartment syndrome also. And hand compartment syndrome or hand or foot in general are more commonly seen in crush injuries or fractures. In forearm, the direct blow, crush injuries or fractures can produce compartment syndrome. In thigh, again, blunt trauma from motor vehicle accident, contusion, or crush injuries. The anterior thigh compartment is the most commonly affected one. In gluteal compartment syndrome, most commonly seen in hypogastric artery ligation or embolization during aortic aneurysm repair, hip arthroplasty, and prolonged compression during operative procedures. This can lead to rhabdomyolysis, renal failure, and sciatic nerve palsy. Sometimes it will be difficult to understand what is going, why the rhabdomyolysis and renal failure. Then you have to suspect a gluteal compartment syndrome. Coming to the treatment, prevention of the compartment syndrome. Most common approach is pharmacological therapy. Blend oxygen radical formation during the perfusion is of an ischemic limb to minimize the IR injury. Mannitol, allopurinol, superoxide dismutase, desferoxamine, thromboxane A2, and melatonin have shown promising in reducing the oxygen radical formation and ICP in animal models. But in humans, reports are anecdotal and we don't have a proper evidence-based situation in this setting. Impending the compartment syndrome, first aid to the hypoxic cell is very important. There is a set protocol known as the MARS protocol to prevent a compartment syndrome happening. Maintaining a normal blood pressure because the hypotension reduces the perfusion pressure, removing any constricting bandages, maintaining the limb at the heart level with no elevation to avoid the reducing the arterial and venous pressure gradient, and supplemental oxygen to optimize the oxygen saturation. Prevention of systemic sequelae of compartment syndrome. But in compartment syndrome, muscle death happens, and this myonecrosis liberate intracellular potassium phosphate, myoglobin, and creatinine phosphokinase. Treatment is designed to prevent systemic sequelae, preventing further complication, electrolyte disturbances, and myoglobinuria. Hyperkalemia. It can even cause cardiac arrest, especially among patients with crush injuries. Aggressive pharmacological interventions, even hemodialysis or continuous hemofiltration can be used. Myoglobinuria. Its nephrotoxic effect is induced by the renal vasoconstriction, tubular cast formation, and direct heme protein induced cytotoxicity. Aggressive crystalloid infusion, post diuresis with mannitol, and alkalinization of the urine with bicarbonate are the options. Heme protein have minimal nephrotoxicity in the absence of hypovolemia and aciduria. But the current recommendation for the management of myoglobinuria include hydration with a goal of urine pH of greater than 6.5. Despite there is a debate on sodium bicarbonate, whether it is useful or not, but in general, it is stated that sodium bicarbonate has not been shown to any superior effect on saline diuresis. Myoglobin is poorly cleared by conventional dialysis membrane because it is a large molecule with 17,000 kilodalton. So hemodialysis is not useful in this setting. But continuous venous hemofiltration has shown some promising result in the preliminary studies. So renal replacement therapies are not indicated in myoglobinuria in isolation, but it is can be used in the setting of severe hyperkalemia. Coming to fasciotomy. The criteria for fasciotomy is dictated on clinical grounds or by ICP measurements. Absolute indications are tense compartment plus either pain with passive motion of the muscle traversing the same compartment or paralysis or paresthesia referable to the same compartment. Tense compartment in a patient who cannot be examined serially due to obtundation or need or other surgeries, or an ICP minus mean blood pressure, the dynamic pressure less than 40 millimeter of mercury, or in comparison with diastolic blood pressure less than 10 millimeter of mercury. Potential other indications are acute ischemia more than 6 hours, combined arterial and venous traumatic injuries, phlegmasia cerulea dolens, tense compartment after crush injuries, tense compartment after fracture. But in the current consensus on phlegmasia cerulea dolens is not to go for an early fasciotomy, rather more concentrating on improving the outflow that will take care of the compartment later on. The clinical criteria: a tense, swollen tense compartment, pain with passive motion of the muscle group traversing the compartment, and neurological finding referable to the compartment. Not all the criteria are required to proceed with fasciotomy. A turgid compartment with either other two criteria, pain with passive movement or neurological changes, are sufficient. Any neurological findings referable to a tense compartment is an absolute indication for expeditious fasciotomy because nerve injury is the early injury and it is ongoing. The presence of a tense compartment alone places the limb in an equivocal category for fasciotomy, or continued serial examination are the options. Patients who are obtunded and require other operation or poor candidates for serial examination, making fasciotomy as the best option. If serial examinations are pursued, they must be performed by an experienced surgeon, preferably by the same surgeon in the serial manner. In equivocal cases, ICP measurement may assist in decision making. An important consideration is likely to evolution of muscle swelling over the next several hours. In an equivocal case in which additional muscle swelling is inevitable, a prophylactic fasciotomy may be prudent. This is very common when a patient comes into emergency room with acute limb ischemia and you are planning for an intervention, because the reperfusion is going to happen if you if you are able to revascularize. So you can go with a prophylactic fasciotomy. Scenario in which the prophylactic fasciotomy may be reasonable is acute ischemia exceeding 6 hours, especially if there is inadequate collateral flow or combined arterial and venous traumatic injuries. Intracompartmental pressure measurement. The threshold ICP remains, I mentioned in the beginning, it's not used. Nowadays, we are more into dynamic ICP, and either the differential with mean arterial of less than 40 millimeter of mercury, or with diastolic less than 10 millimeter of mercury is selected as the indication. Contraindication to fasciotomy. Fasciotomy is contraindicated when the extremity is non-viable. Due to extensive traumatic or ischemic injury, there is no point in doing a fasciotomy. And other thing is crush injuries, in particular when the entire limb is affected. it can produce life-threatening complications of reperfusion with the magnitude of electrolyte shifts happen immediately after the fasciotomy. Because once you release the facial boundaries, there will be arterial blood coming and swiping all the toxic materials from the compartment into the systemic circulation back. So coming to the technique of fasciotomy, fasciotomy is the only non-treatment for acute compartment syndrome. So for the lower leg, as we know that there are four anatomic compartments: anterior, lateral, superficial posterior, and deep posterior. The most common injured nerve in lower leg fasciotomy is superficial peroneal nerve. The compartments with the muscle groups in each compartment. The length of the skin incision is critical to ensuring the complete decompression. A subcutaneous fasciotomy, which was used in the past, now it is not recommended because in general, skin itself acts as a barrier for release of the pressure. So in later it usually require an extension of the skin incision and complete fasciotomy. So full decompression of all compartments of the leg require an incision of 12 to 20 centimeter long. And limited incision can be used when the muscle swelling is expected to be the minimal. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to predict whether the edema is going to be less or more. There are two techniques: double incision technique and single incision technique. We'll go with the more common double incision technique. In this general, the first incision is a generous longitudinal incision on the lateral aspect between the fibular shaft and the crest of the tibia, directly over the intermuscular septum between the anterior and lateral compartment. Approximately 4 centimeter lateral to the crest of the tibia. Skin flaps are raised medially and laterally to expose the fascia of the anterior and lateral compartment. The anterior lateral compartment, then the fascia is opened separately, parallel incision according to the skin incision, 12 to 20 centimeter facial incision. The scissors of the lifted off the muscle to avoid injury of the underlying muscle and nerves passing through the compartment. And it should be terminated superiorly 4 to 5 centimeter distal to the fibular head. All this serve to prevent nerve damage. Second incision is placed in the medial aspect of the leg, 1 to 2 centimeter posterior to the tibia for decompression of the two posterior compartment. And during this time, we may come across the saphenous vein and nerve in the subcutaneous tissue that should be safeguarded. This needed, maybe we may have to use the vein for grafting. So injuring the vein is not a nice idea when you are doing a fasciotomy. Superficial posterior compartment is decompressed via along the longitudinal insertion on the gastrocnemius fascia. Now we have to move to the deep compartment. By dividing the attachments of soleus muscle from the tibia, you can expose the fascia overlying the tibialis posterior and the flexor muscles of the foot. And then you can incise the fascia and release the deep compartment. During this incision, you should be careful about the posterior tibial artery. These are the two incision technique, and it is relatively simple to do, and it's a rapid procedure. Decompress the four compartments of the leg. Most of the surgeons go for this technique. Another technique is single incision technique. A lateral incision over the fibula, from the fibular neck to 3 to 4 centimeter above the lateral malleolus. The subcutaneous flap is developed in the anterior direction to access the anterior and lateral compartment. The posterior subcutaneous flap is developed to access the superficial posterior compartment and for a longitudinal facial incision. The interval between the lateral and superficial posterior compartment is exposed. Then you will come across the attachment of flexor hallucis longus muscle with the fibula that is separated so that you can get access into the deep posterior compartment. During this dissection, you will come across the peroneal vessels that should be safeguarded. Peroneal vessels should be displaced posteriorly to avoid these structures during the subperiosteal dissection. The facial attachment of the posterior tibial muscle to the fibula is inside to open the deep posterior compartment. And initial, especially historically important, is the fibulectomy. Previously, they did a fibulectomy to completely release pressure from all four compartments. For this purpose, they remove the mid-third of the fibula, which fibula being a non-weight bearing bone, it doesn't produce any impact in the future. But you have to carefully remove only the mid-third because the lower third is forming the angle joint, and upper third has important, important relation with nerves. So mid third of the fibula, if you remove, you can completely decompress all the four compartment in a single go. But in general, it is not practiced nowadays. Coming to thigh, there are three compartments: anterior, posterior, and medial compartment. In most cases, single lateral incision may be used to decompress the posterior and the anterior compartment, whereas the medial compartment rarely requires a decompression. And in buttock, there are three major muscle groups. Each has its own facial compartment. There is no universally accepted standard incision. Usually, a longitudinal incision is taken to decompress all the three muscles. And some others recommend neurolysis of the sciatic nerve to prevent future inflammatory adhesions of the nerve. In the foot, there are 9 compartments. You can release this 9 compartment by 2 dorsal incision, 2 longitudinal dorsal incision in the medial aspect of second metatarsal and lateral aspect of fourth metatarsal will release almost all compartment. A separate incision is required to decompress the calcaneal compartment. Care must be taken to avoid the medial and lateral plantar neurovascular bundle injury. And mostly these compartment syndrome of the foot are produced by crush injuries. In arm, there are 2 compartments. You can with an anterior and posterior incision, you can release the compartments in the arm. Coming to the forearm, the most frequent site of compartment syndrome in the upper extremity. There are 4 compartments again in the forearm. Most commonly affected is the volar compartment, which is released by an incision starting from the medial side of the elbow, then crossing along to the radial aspect, and then coming back again and coming up to the wrist. Sometimes you can even extend into the arm if the arm is into the hand if the hand is also involved. If the dorsal ICP is elevated, a long incision of the lateral epicondyle to the wrist is performed to release the dorsal extensor aspect of the forearm. Carpal tunnel release are controversial and may not be benefited from isolated forearm compartment syndromes. In the hand, it's a rare location for compartment syndrome. There are 10 compartments, and in general, it is caused by crush injury or fracture of the bones. All patients should have a carpal tunnel release, and most will require 1 or 2 dorsal interosseous fasciotomies. Many patients will also require a thenar and hypothenar fasciotomies. Now coming to the fasciotomy wound management. Fasciotomy may solve the problem of increased ICP, but the source of considerable short and long-term morbidity is associated. A vacuum-assisted closure therapy is an alternative means for wound closure, which can also fasten the edema relief. Fasciotomy wound closure has been attained through a variety of approach, either by a delayed primary closure or closure by a secondary indentation, a gradual dermal apposition, or by a skin grafting, or a myocutaneous flap, especially when you have a neurovascular structure or bone exposed. Outcomes. Early outcomes. The outcomes are in general is related to the primary problem, which is caused the rising compartmental pressure, not directly related to the fasciotomy as such. The mortality rate of the patient undergoing fasciotomy ranges up to 11 to 15%. Major amputation required 5 to 21% of the limbs undergoing fasciotomy, and wound complication is very common from 4 to 38% of the patient. And wound complications are more frequently associated with delayed when the fasciotomy is delayed for more than 6 hours. That is 37% compared to the early fasciotomies. And renal failures as complication of after compartment syndrome, unless there is a considerable myonecrosis. And neurologic deficit in 7 to 36% of the limbs studied. Late outcomes determined largely by functional status of the patient at the hospital discharge. In a study by Pritzker and colleague, 77% of the fasciotomies were associated with impaired sensation at the margins of the wound. And some 7% of the patient had fasciotomy wound tethered to the tendon, and 13% had recurrent ulceration at the fasciotomy site. Another interesting point is another study by Fernandez and colleagues, a significant proportion of the patient had a clinical evidence of chronic venous insufficiency after lower leg fasciotomy due to impaired calf muscle pump action. And a small subset of patient had a late amputation after 30 days and within 1 year. A sequelae of missed compartment syndrome, increasing the risk of neurologic deficit, amputation, and renal failure. Is the complication of a missed compartment syndrome. A study by Sheridan and colleagues found that overall complication rate increased dramatically if fasciotomy was delayed for more than 12 hours. In this group, patient had 54% of the patient had complication compared with early fasciotomies. Only 4.5 patients had in this group had complication. Nearly half of the patient with delayed fasciotomy required amputation, and 92% had significant neuropathy. And delay in fasciotomy more than 36 hours invariably result in amputation. And after 3 to 4 days, compartment syndrome is not indicated since the rate of infection and muscle necrosis is prohibitively high. So if you do a fasciotomy, obviously there will be some portion of the muscles will be dead, later get secondary infection and more complicate the situation. And the classical consequence of a missed compartment syndrome is Volkmann's ischemic contracture. In this state, the ischemic muscle and nerve tissue replaced with fibrosis, leaving a compartment firm, contracted, and dysfunctional. Adjacent joint becomes stiff and immobile. Treatment of contracture and joint capsule release. An orthopedician also should be a part of the procedure. Chronic exertional compartment syndrome, or it can be called as chronic compartment syndrome. A syndrome of exercise-induced pain and tightness that usually affect the muscle of the lower leg, especially the anterior and lateral compartment, due to increased ICP and transient muscle ischemia. The typical patient is a young, between 20 to 30 years, athletic patient who is a runner. The syndrome is characterized by pain beginning 20 to 30 minutes after onset of exercise, and it abates with 15 to 30 minutes of rest. Paresthesia and muscle dysfunction often occur in distribution of peripheral nerve traversing the compartment. Symptoms are bilateral in 82% of the patient. That means most of the patient have bilateral symptoms. Physical examination often shows tenderness of the affected muscle compartment. The differential diagnosis for this is facial hernias, medial tibial syndrome for the anterior compartment, claudication due to popliteal entrapment for the calf symptoms. Although MRI and other tests rule out the other causes of leg pain, measurement of an ICP is required to secure the diagnosis of chronic compartment syndrome. There is a criteria for diagnosis: a resting ICP of more than 15 millimeter of mercury, or ICP more than 30 millimeter of mercury within 1 to 2 minutes after the completion of exercise, or ICP more than 20 millimeter of mercury after 5 minutes after the completion of exercise. One or more of these criteria is sufficient to diagnose with the characteristic symptoms that are reproducible on exercise. Fasciotomy for chronic exertional compartment syndrome. The treatment of chronic exertional compartment syndrome is either avoidance of the precipitating exercise or surgical decompression. But most of the patients go for surgical decompression. There are two techniques: fasciotomy or fasciectomies. The figure shows the technique of fasciotomy. We go for two horizontal incision. Exactly, the incisions are kept on the intermuscular septum, and we'll take another subcutaneous incision in the anterior and lateral compartments. Both the anterior and lateral compartments are released by this technique. Another technique is fasciectomy, a single longitudinal skin incision overlaying the intermuscular septum between the anterior and lateral compartment. And two standard longitudinal fasciotomy incisions are performed, and the anterior and lateral compartment, followed by resection of 2 into 6 centimeter ellipse of fascia. In his review by Turnipseed, he told fasciectomy as the treatment of choice for the chronic compartment syndrome after studying 796 patients with chronic exertional compartment syndrome. The long-term result appears promising in case of series with fasciotomy also in 83% of the patient after 2 years of study. Thank you.